Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 sequel, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is one of those films that I definitely do feel is a worthy entry in this franchise, but as the years have gone by, I've honestly become less enamored with it as a whole. It's one of those movies that, don't get me wrong, I do still have fun with. I still like the film, but I definitely don't love the movie. And I will detail why I feel that way soon enough. Now, the film is directed by Steven Spielberg, and he directed the other two films in the series leading up to this, in Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom. And he was contractually obligated to direct a third Indiana Jones movie. And I think that's where you start to see some problems arise with this production, because I personally don't feel that Spielberg really 100% wanted to do this movie. I think it's one of those things where he was contractually obligated to do it, so he did it, and he made the best of it. But I don't feel that he really wanted to do another Indiana Jones film. And the reason why I feel that way is because I don't feel the same Spielberg spark or energy is present consistently throughout this film when it comes to the direction. And also, he was in a different place when it comes to his mindset and his passion around the time of this film's release. He was more into doing dramatic stuff like The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun. He was less into doing these kind of adventure romps. That really wasn't where his mind was. So you have a Spielberg who was really trying to branch out and be a different kind of filmmaker. And now he's thrust back into this mold that he didn't necessarily want to be in. And as a result, you have a film that it's good from a directorial standpoint, but it's not great, because you have moments where Spielberg just kind of seems like he's going through the motions, at least to me personally. But because Spielberg is such a tremendous filmmaker, there are multiple sequences throughout this film that do have that Spielberg spark and that energy and that signature style. And those are on par with a lot of the other sequences that he shot in the other two films in the series leading up to this. Like the whole opening with the train, the way that he choreographed that, the way that he set up the framing of his shots was excellent. The tank battle, the tank chase, I thought that was just a absolutely spectacular sequence. It's one of my all-time favorite action scenes in the series, in the entire franchise. I think that sequence is on par with any of the other action scenes and any of the other films in the series when it comes to the way that Spielberg shot that scene. Um, Even some of the sequences in the catacombs with the rats, or some of the shots with the boat chase. Honestly, the whole boat chase is well shot. I just wish it was longer, and I felt it kind of lacked an extra gear. But it's not a poorly shot sequence by any means. The establishing shot of the Grail Temple, utilizing a real setting, was gorgeous and breathtaking. The way that he showcased the Grail lair, I thought that was also really well done. So it's one of those films where you got scenes where Spielberg is still at his peak, at his best. Like the sequence where Indiana and his father are tied up to the chair, and the whole room is on fire, and then they start doing this bit with the revolving room. The way that that scene was shot was very tense, was very suspenseful, but also very witty and very fun, and just had a great amount of energy to it. And that's what makes some of these scenes in the film where you don't have the same energy a little disappointing when it comes to the direction. And I think another reason why Spielberg's direction isn't necessarily on the same level as what he brought to the screen with Raiders and Temple is that in this film, it's a more tongue in cheek, campy, silly movie when it comes to the tone. And it's a reaction or a correction to the backlash for Temple of Doom, because Temple of Doom was considered to be too violent, too dark, too edgy, and as a result, the film feels like it's playing it very safe, even from a directorial standpoint. Spielberg isn't taking the same risks visually, and I think it really does show, and it makes me wonder what this film would have looked like if the backlash wasn't so severe when it comes to Temple of Doom, and this was able to be a film visually that was closer to the more daring, more adventurous look and feel and style of the first two films. But as it is, Spielberg still does a good job. It's a good job. But I don't think it reaches the same peak as what he did in the previous two films. Now, the screenplay by Jeffrey Boehm, it's honestly where a lot of my issues with this film lie, but it's still a good script. I still feel that Jeffrey Boehm, considering the circumstances, considering the limitations that he had as a writer of this particular film at this particular time, I think it turned out rather well. I think it could have been better, but I still feel that considering a lot of the things that he was uh, running into, or a lot of the things that he couldn't possibly do with this script, I still feel that he managed to really bring a lot to this film. And some of you might be wondering what I'm talking about when it comes to like these shackles. Well, I think this film was a movie that was made by a committee. This is a film that was made by the committee of Spielberg, Lucas, the studio, and fan interaction, like fan surveys in terms of what they want from another Indiana Jones film. And as a result, you have some of the individuality stripped away because there isn't really as much of a place for that. So what you have is a script that's checking off multiple boxes. It's a screenplay that is built by a committee and set up to have the most mass appeal and to be the tonal and complete opposite of something like Temple of Doom, because of the fact that that film was so divisive with a lot of fans and critics. So Boehm was asked to make a film, to write a movie, an Indiana Jones film that was closer to Raiders. And as a result, I personally think it's too much like Raiders, but I don't blame Jeffrey for that. Because I don't think it's really his fault. And despite that, he still shines. I love the dynamic between Indiana and his father. It's some of my favorite elements of any script in this entire franchise. I love how they're just cantankerous with one another and how they're sniping at each other, and there's all these different back and forths, and Indiana just wants his dad to talk to him more and be there for him, and his father doesn't really understand what the big deal is, and both of them are butting heads, And the dialogue and just everything that involves these two characters is really iconic, just incredible stuff. And what makes it all the more special is that Bohm just does a brilliant job building up this dynamic. So then when you get to the point at the end of the film where Indiana is trying to get the Grail and his father tells him to let it go, it's an amazing moment because of the fact that Bohm did such a good job building up this just gradual evolution of these two characters and their relationship with one another, where they started out strained, and Indiana wanted certain things from his father, and his father wasn't able to give that to him, and they were estranged, and hadn't really been together and hadn't really communicated with each other for many, many years. And it all culminates in this moment where the two characters have this just great moment of bonding with one another, where Indiana's father, for the first time, calls him Indiana, and not in a joking manner. He seriously calls him the name that he's been wanting his dad to call him this entire time. And there's even moments that I really like, even building up to that, like the whole stuff with the birds and the bit where Indy's dad uses the umbrella to send the birds flying into the air and causing the plane to crash, and he quotes Charlemagne, and then Indy gets a little bit of appreciation for his father in that moment. The scene where Henry thinks that his son is dead, and he thinks that Indiana died when he flew off the cliff, when he went off the cliff. And you do have that funny bit where Indiana is just looking down with the rest of them, like, what are they looking at? But then there's this really great heartwarming moment where Henry realizes that his son is still alive. And so there's a lot of just great moments like that. Even the stuff where Henry's shot, he gets shot, and Indiana, he has to use his father's teachings and what his father learned and the knowledge that he obtained throughout these years to find the grail against time, because it's a serious time crunch, because if he doesn't get the grail in time, his dad's gonna die. So yeah, I love that about this script. I do feel that it would have been nice to have seen Indiana and his father get together earlier in the story, because I don't feel the stuff with Indiana and Elsa is really as strong. But once you get to that point, the movie is just an absolute blast. And in large part, it's due to what Bohm brings to this script with these two characters. They become the heart and the soul of the movie. And they really are what makes this film what it is. Like, if you didn't have that dynamic, this film would not be anywhere near as good. And there are other things about the script that I like. I like the prologue. I like, even though it's a little bit convenient that Indiana gets all of his defining character traits in one day, I still like that sequence because it's different, it's fresh. It's a new way to open up an Indiana Jones movie with young Indiana going on an adventure and trying to take the cross of Coronado away from this robber and return it to a museum. And then how that transitions to Indiana as an adult, finally getting the cross back during that sequence on the boat. And I love the fact that the Holy Grail is a MacGuffin. I think that was a really good choice by Bohm and by other people involved with the production, because I think that is definitely a MacGuffin that is way up there when it comes to religious artifacts. And I like the whole different trials and different uh, uh, bits of let's just say mystery and solving puzzles and stuff like that that Indiana has to do to find the Grail, like stepping on the word of God, avoiding the decapitating blades by kneeling. I love the leap of faith, even though it is kind of a weird looking effect. I still like the concept of that, where in order to get to the Grail, you have to take a leap of faith, and I even don't mind the Grail Knight, even as implausible as it is. I still don't mind it. I think it's interesting. Of course, that leads to, the great bits of the Grail Knight where you chose poorly or you chose wisely. And yeah, there's just a lot of good choices by Bohm in this script. I think there are some really great lines of dialogue, no ticket, uh, fun, just really memorable uh, uh, bits of banter between Indiana and his dad, and Indiana and other characters. And that's why when you get to the parts of this film that are really not on the same level when it comes to the script, it's a little disappointing because you have these elements that are just excellent, great stuff. And then you have like weak villains and unbelievably forgettable, unmemorable villains, and Donovan and the Vogel and Elsa. Elsa could have been a really interesting character because she's a character who has feelings for Indiana, but is also working for the enemy, but she doesn't necessarily agree with the enemy's tactics or what they believe in. But the way that it's written is just very, um, just kind of weak. Like the best effort isn't really put into it. It's kind of just a weak effort when it comes to this character, and so these different dynamics of this character never really stick. Doesn't help either that the romance between Elsa and Indiana is not effective, and I do kind of blame Jeffrey for that. But also at the same time, I don't think Jeffrey wanted to write a love story. That's another one of those things where I gotta put a love interest in here because I'm crossing off a checklist. Raiders had a love interest, Temple had a love interest. Well, Last Crusade has to have a love interest too, so here's Elsa. And with the villains, like, you remember lines from Belloc. Even Molaram, yeah, he doesn't have a ton of depth, but he's intimidating and he has a certain presence to him. And the script does a good job really emphasizing that. Here, there's no presence at all to Donovan. He honestly comes across like a poor man's Belloc, and that's not a good thing. It's already a film that already kind of has this appearance and feel and vibe from the script of being like diet raiders. So you didn't really need to have like a villain who really makes that even more clear. And Vogel, yeah, has some good moments like this is how we say goodbye in Germany, but he doesn't have a lot of other moments other than that. And he's just really heavy. He's about as memorable at the end of the day as your average mini boss in a video game. Like there really isn't a lot of depth to him. And I do kind of blame Jeffrey for that because these villains they're weak. They're the weakest villains in the entire series to me. Like honestly, I feel Donovan is an even weaker villain than Mads's character in Dial of Destiny, because that character had a certain intriguing sort of dynamic with him when it comes to his past and what he was doing with the government in the 60s. I don't think it was a really well executed character when it comes to the characterization in that film either, but it was just a little bit more interesting. Like Donovan just like oh, it's Belloc, but not as charismatic and not as fun to watch. And even the Vogel character, like you're trying to make him intimidating and like a worthy foe, But then you have stuff like the no ticket scene and these other sequences that really do make him into just not really much of a threat. And that leads to another problem that I have with the script, because of the fact that it's a screenplay that's taking an extreme route in terms of overcorrecting what people didn't like in Temple of Doom. You have a movie that's more tongue in cheek, more campy, and a little more silly, and definitely trying more to make people smile or make people laugh or smirk, instead of really providing consistent thrills or scares or anything like that. So, what you have is a script that is emphasizing a lot of humor and wit and comedy, and that leads to a lot of scenes not having any tension. That just feels like there's no tension to these scenes because the stakes don't feel that high, and you just feel like, oh, well, there's the bike chase, but then you have a dumpy Nazi who's riding around on a bike, and you have the Willem scream, and it just feels like a lot of that is just set up for another joke. And there's just a lot of stuff that just feels like it's a setup for a punchline instead of for, a punch, or for a thrill or a chill. And that's something that really made the Indiana Jones film stand out from other franchises, is a combination of like fantasy and horror and action and adventure. And this just really emphasized the comedy a bit too much for my tastes. And it gets to the point where you got Hitler being used as a punchline with the whole scene where Hitler signs the diary. And speaking of people being used as a punchline, I don't like the way that Jeffrey wrote Marcus Brody at all. I really do not like this take on his character. To me, it's character assassination. It's just completely destroying the integrity of this character for a laugh. And I don't like that. I don't care for that at all. Because yes, Marcus had some moments where he might have been a little bumbling or might have had that vibe in Raiders, but not to the extent of the script here, where he's turned into a total fool, a laughing stock. He's a punchline. Oh, he gets lost in his museum, and you have the whole bit where Indiana tells the German officer he's experienced, he's got all these skills, he's probably gone by now, only for him to get caught. It really did feel like Jeffrey just took Marcus Brody and just made him into some kind of bumbling fool just to have another series of laughs for the audience. And I don't like that, because I think Marcus is a better character than that. There's that whole bit in Raiders where he's speaking to Indy and he's talking about how he would have loved to have gone on the adventure with Indy or try to find the Ark. In his prime, he might have been able to be helpful, or might have been able to find it, because it just, you get the vibe that Marcus at one point, he was not necessarily Indiana Jones's equal, but he was not a bumbling fool. He could definitely hold his own in an adventure, and that just isn't the case here. It even kind of carries over to Sala and the way that he's written, even though he has more moments where he at least, gets to punch a guy. But there's a lot of other stuff where, they emphasize the comic relief stuff. And I just feel those two characters, they're better than just bumbling comic relief. So I don't like that at all when it comes to this script. But not all the comedy is bad. Like I said, some of the comedy is great and it's funny, and it does add to the enjoyment and the endearing aspects of this script. And I like the way that it ends with the Grail being left behind, and the whole idea of the Grail being left behind is a way for Indiana and his father to connect and really solidify this new chapter in their relationship. And I like the ending with the main cast riding off into the sunset. So, yes, it's a script that has its issues. I mean, there's even like the stuff with the subplot with the protectors of the Grail, which really didn't feel like it went anywhere. Um, but it's still one of those things where, despite my issues with the script, I do think it's still ultimately a good screenplay. I think Boehm did a good job, especially considering the fact that this is a guy who was overworked. This is a guy who had a lot on his plate at the time. I mean, he worked on Lethal Weapon 2, which also came out the same year. So, considering the fact that he had a pretty heavy workload, what he did here is is really really quite good. Now, the film features a cast that I honestly think is a bit of a mixed bag, but it's headlined by two terrific, legendary, iconic performers. And the scenes with those two are just really special movie magic. And yeah, the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery was really great, and just absolutely grand stuff. And Harrison once again steps into this role and just puts on the hat, cracks the whip, and he just does a amazing job playing the ultimate adventurer. And you just can't really help but be glued to the screen when it comes to him playing this character. He's just so charismatic, he's so likable, and when it comes to action, he's so believable as the man of action. And I feel that having Sean Connery play off of him really did elevate Harrison's performance in a lot of ways, because Harrison, it really felt like he had to up his game because he's got James Bond. He's got Sean Connery. He's got Sir Sean Connery acting alongside him. So that made him up his game acting wise. It also led to Sean upping his game because he's got a new icon in Harrison Ford. And the two just really gave it their all here. And it shows. Harrison really showcases a little bit more comedy, a little bit more comedic chops here. And I think, other than the Scottish Tapestries bit, which I thought was really lame, the attempts and the way that he handles comedy in this film is genuinely witty and funny. And Sean Connery, I think that he not only handles the comedy well, but he also handles other aspects of his character very well. Because in a lot of ways, he's the antithesis of James Bond, Henry Jones Sr. He's not a man of action. He's a man of literature. And it's nice to see that Sean Connery is really capable of playing both. He's capable of being the man of action when he needs to be in films, but also this kind of bookworm character in Henry Jones. Now, the rest of the cast, though, like I said, it's a mixed bag. Denholm Elliott, I don't blame him for his performance as Marcus Brody here. He almost makes it work because he's a talented actor, but I just don't like the way the character is written, so I don't think there was any way for that to really work for me. Um, Alison Doody, she's a beautiful woman, but I don't think she's much of an actress. I've never really felt that way about her, and I think her performance in this is pretty stiff, especially a lot of her lines. I really don't feel she had any chemistry with Harrison Ford, and definitely no romantic spark. And I just didn't really think the performance was really that impressive. I think they could have cast someone else who maybe not might not have been as striking of a beauty but honestly might have provided more to the film because would have provided more of a screen presence beyond just aesthetics. Um, John Rhys-Davies, he was a lot of fun as Sala again. Honestly, would have liked to have seen him even more. Julian Glover, I thought he was just really nothing that unique, nothing that memorable, nothing that charismatic. A very dull performance, very dull character, dull performance. Um, Glover is an English actor, and he put on an American accent for the film, and you can kind of tell because it's one of those American accents that doesn't sound really like anything that you really are used to hearing. And even if he would just voiced his character with the British accent, I still think the character would really not have been much, and I still wouldn't have thought that much of his performance because first off, I don't think he's really charismatic of enough actor to really play a villain, and second, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's a very boring performance. It's very one note, very sing-songy in terms of the line delivery, and I just wish there was somebody else who played this character who could chew the scenery a little bit more and do it in a way that was entertaining, like the kind of villain that you love to hate, like Belloc. Instead, you're just bored by this guy. Like, get Dennis Hopper in there. Can you imagine how much better this film would have been with Dennis Hopper playing Donovan, acting alongside Sean Connery and Harrison Ford? Instead, like any scene with Julian Glover playing Donovan, he's getting absolutely blown off the screen by Sean Connery or Harrison Ford, and that's not good when it comes to your main villain. Honestly, he's blown off the screen when it comes to the scenes he shares with Michael Byrne, who plays Vogel, who's the guy who's kind of taking orders from Donovan. And Michael Byrne, he's not what I would consider to be a amazing performer in this either, but he at least had a screen presence to him. He was at least somewhat intimidating. I never felt that way about Julian Glover. He was about as intimidating as your average game show host. He really was. And in terms of the cast, I definitely want to mention River Phoenix, who played the young Indiana Jones in the prologue, because River, for a short little cameo role, he put a lot into it. He studied Harrison's mannerisms and the way that Harrison carried himself, and like the little quirks and the little different subtle things and nuances of Harrison that made Harrison who he is, and incorporated them into the performance. And it's really convincing, despite the fact that really River and Harrison don't really look that much alike at all. But the fact that he went the extra mile and just incorporated all these different things from Harrison to this short role really made it something that I think was definitely a standout performance when it comes to River's career. And it is an absolute shame that his life was cut short, and he's no longer with us, because I think he was definitely a rising star and a very talented performer. And what he showcases here with this sequence with the young Indiana Jones is a good example of that. So, yeah, mixed bag cast, but you just have the duo of Harrison Ford and Sean Connery that manages to still make it all work because they are capable enough to carry the film. And then you have other aspects of the film from a technical standpoint that are also solid, like the cinematography by Douglas Slocum, the editing by Michael Kahn. Uh, of course, you have the score by John Williams, which is once again just really stupendous, just spectacular, stellar stuff. I would say I wouldn't honestly say it's a score that's better than Raiders or Temple of Doom, but it's only like just a little bit of a step down from those two. because it's still got the legendary theme, the main Indiana Jones theme that's still as rousing as ever. Then you have some of the other newer themes that he creates for this film, like the tank battle music or the music during the train sequence, or the Grail music, or the score that's used to essentially provide a little beat for Harrison and Sean Connery when it comes to the scenes with each other. But I would say like the Grail music, the legendary Grail music, is honestly some of my favorite uh, bits of the score in the Last Crusade. It's just so mythical, and just really does provide this very epic feel to the film. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this film, except it's not a film that I love, but it is a movie that I love certain aspects of it, and it's a film that has enough going for it that, despite my issues and despite the flaws that I personally see with the film, it's still a very worthwhile, very entertaining experience. It's definitely a movie that I'm glad to watch, and it's a film that I will gladly watch again. And it's still a film that feels like an Indiana Jones movie. And despite the fact that I don't think it's really what I want out of an Indiana Jones film as a whole, because I like the grit, I like the darkness, I like the edgier stuff that you see in Raiders and Temple, and even in some parts of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But it still feels so much like an Indiana Jones film when it comes to the spirit and its approach, in comparison to, let's just say, Dial of Destiny, which doesn't really come across or feel like an Indiana Jones film at all to me. This still evokes that spirit of adventure, and that's why it's always going to have a place in my collection, and honestly in my heart, because I really love adventure movies, and I really love Indiana Jones films, or at least good Indiana Jones films. And this is definitely one of them. But anyway, thanks for watching my thoughts and my review of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And until next time, I'll see you later.